Thanks for letting us come. My name is Steve Neely, and I'm the president of an investment firm. Harold Dance Investments is the name of our firm. And we've been asked to help establish a retirement plan for Aztech Materials. So that's why we're here today, to kind of tell you about it and then help people get enrolled in the retirement plan if you want to. Okay? So I'm just going to start talking about the retirement plan, but this won't be so formal that you can't say, hey, wait a second, what does that mean? Or I've got questions about this. So if things pop into your head, don't hesitate to stop me, and I'd be happy to address any questions or concerns that you might have. So this retirement plan, it will allow you or any of the employees that are non-union to contribute, to have money withheld from your pay to go into a retirement account to then be used by you later in life when you're not working, okay? Now, many people will say, I don't want money taken out of my paycheck. I want more money going into my paycheck. But the reality is, for this plan, if you want to participate, it's voluntary, you don't have to. But if you want to participate, you will have to elect to have some amount of money withheld from your pay. That's the bad news. What's the good news? The good news is that Aztech is going to match whatever you withheld from your pay. They're going to match it dollar for dollar up to 3% of your gross pay. So as an example, let's say, I'll just use a round number. Let's say in a pay period, you earn $100 in a pay period. And let's say you have $3 withheld from your pay. That $3 goes into your retirement account, and guess what? $3 more are added. Where does the $3 other come from? It comes from Aztech. Now you've got $6 in your retirement account, but you only felt the pain of losing $3, and actually you don't even feel the pain of losing $3. The reason is because it comes out pre-tax, meaning you would have had to pay income tax on those $3 that you contributed, but since you have it withheld from your pay, you don't pay income tax. So you'll feel the pain, in my example, of maybe not having $2 or $2.50. You'll feel that. But on the flip side, you've got $6 in your retirement account. In my opinion, that's a pretty good deal. You know, I'll take that deal any day. And then the money that's in your retirement account is yours. It's got your name on it in your account, and then it can grow for you over time and hopefully grow into something that then you can use when you're not working. That's the whole point, okay? Incidentally, when you start taking money out of the account, when you start withdrawing money from the account, at that time it will be taxable to you at that time, at whatever tax rate or tax circumstance you're at that time. Usually people earn more money and pay more tax when they're working than when they're not working. That's usually the case, right? And so that's the sweet spot. Put money into the plan when you are working, when you are earning money, when you are paying tax. You in essence get a tax deduction. It reduces your taxable income. That's good. Then take the money out later when you're retired or not working. When your taxable income is lower, you'll pay less tax at that time, possibly even no tax. It'll depend on your circumstances. But if some people are at a level where they don't pay income tax, that could be the case. So that's the sweet spot. Put money in when you are paying tax and earning money, and then you withdraw money later, you know, when you're not working. So that's kind of the sweet spot. Now, people will ask me, well, how much money, or what will be the return or the increase in the dollars once they're in your retirement account? Well, that will depend upon how that money is invested, okay? And so each of you can choose for yourself how the money is invested. You can have it invested very conservatively. We have investment options that are like a savings account at a bank. That's the good news. There's no volatility. They're safe. The bad news is they don't earn much. Only about 0.5% per year. That interest rate might go up a little bit, but it won't have very good long-term potential. On the other end of the scale, we have some alternatives that are much more aggressive and which will probably generate a really good long-term return. But there's a problem with that too. There will be volatility along the way, ups and downs. In my opinion, in a retirement account, by definition, it should be viewed as a long-term account. You shouldn't view it. I think it's a mistake to view it as, well, I'm going to put money in, get the employer match, and then I'll turn around and withdraw the money right out of the account. I guess someone could do that. You would end up paying penalties if you take the money out before age 59 and a half, and within 2 years of when it went in, actually. There's up to a 25% penalty in addition to tax, income tax. So it doesn't make sense to do that. Where it makes sense is to put money in and then allow it to grow. So by definition, this type of plan it's a long-term type of plan. And so if it's going to be long-term, I would say invest the money consistent with that in a long-term time horizon. And then even though there will be ups and downs along the way, that's natural, nothing to be afraid of. But over time, if someone's willing to tolerate some ups and downs, you'll be the beneficiary of that over time. And it's surprising, isn't it, Aaron, to so many. Oh, by the way, I should have introduced Aaron. This is Aaron, my assistant. Sorry, Aaron. That's fine. But Aaron and I, we've had so many clients that are almost there. They don't almost believe when they see the returns that people are able to get over time. It can be really significant. Usually not in any 1 year, it's not that significant. This last year happens to be, 2017 was a well above average year. We saw clients with returns in excess of 30%, but I'm hesitant to even say that because I don't want someone to think that's common. Mm-hmm. It's not, that's unusual. It was above average, it did happen. It'll probably happen again from time to time in the future, but there might be years where the return is below average. In fact, not there might be, there will be. Mm-hmm. And there will probably be years where the return is negative, where the values actually go down. But if someone can tolerate that variability in the return, the long-term return ends up usually being very, very significant. Now, one of the really cool investment alternatives that I think it's probably appropriate for the vast majority of participants, maybe 90% or more of the participants, you have available to you, and I think this is a really good option for most people, an investment fund that's called a target date fund. Okay? These target date funds have a year associated with them in 5-year increments. For example, we have a 2020 fund, a 2025 fund, a 2030, 35, 40, 45, 50, 55, 60, and on. That year corresponds to the year close to the time that you think you might retire. So for example, if someone thinks they might retire on or about the year 2020 or 2030, give or take a few years, we could put the money in the 2030 fund. And then guess what will happen? Right now, see, we're about 12 years away from 2030. That fund will be invested assuming that you're going to retire in 2030. And it will gradually become more and more conservative as we approach the year 2030. And then in 2030, it'll be pretty conservative. Although it'll still generate respectable returns because usually people, when they retire, they don't withdraw all of the money in their retirement account all that first year they retire. Usually they want that money to still be there, If they retire at age 65, if they spend all their money at age 65, what do they do when they're age 66 or 67 or 70?
They go back to work?
Yeah. But if someone wants that money to keep supporting them, a lot of that money will still be there at age 70, 75. And we're seeing people live. In fact, I was just talking to a client. We have a client that is 102 years old. We have another one that just this month turned age 100.
My mom's 97.
97, yeah.
Yeah.
It's amazing. People are, as long as people are living. The reason I bring that up is these target date funds, in the year that is associated with the name of that fund, like the 2030 fund, it's not as if it's ultra conservative in the year 2030, because the fund assumes that you're not going to take all the money out in the year 2030, that you'll continue to take some of it out in years subsequent to 2030. But that's a really good way to go. It's a solid, proven, sound way to have the money invested. Within those target date funds, by the way, there are, 20 or 30 underlying investment funds. So it's, even though you'll see one line item on your statement, you'll receive quarterly statements if you participate in the plan. So you'll get frequent updates as to how much money you have and how it's doing and so forth. But you'll see, if you use a target date fund, you'll see one line item. And some people might ask the question, well, I've heard I shouldn't have all my eggs in one basket. I should be diversified. You've heard that before, probably. And look, all my money's in that one fund. I'm not diversified. I would say, no, that's not true. These one funds are really diversified, tremendous diversification within the fund.
And then, have you guys ever participated in a 401k plan before, a former employer? Most people maybe have had some experience with a 401k. This plan is basically a 401k, but it's designed for small employers.
Right.
And it's a little bit easier to administer, but it does have some differences that I wanted to kind of explain. Mm-hmm. And most of those differences are kind of to the advantage of the employees. So for example, if you participated in a 401k before, maybe you remember there is maybe a vesting schedule, they call it, where the employer will match your dollars that go into the plan, but in order to get those dollars or withdraw those dollars, you have to work for the company for a certain amount of years. Yeah. With the simple IRA, the one that Aztec's chosen to use, the vesting schedule, there's no vesting schedule. So as soon as the dollars go in, they're already your dollars. And in fact, the account that you'll use is already in your name. So in the event you were to leave your employment, there wouldn't be a need to roll over the money into your own IRA or get the money out of the 401k. It's already in your name to begin with. And so if you were to quit, there wouldn't be any action necessary to make sure to get your money out of the plan. It's already in your name, and it'll just continue to get statements and so forth. So that's there. Everything else is pretty similar to a 401k, where you put money in pre-tax, the money goes into the account. Taxation's handled exactly the same as a 401k. Like Steve mentioned, when you take money out of the account, hopefully when you're in retirement, it's then taxable. But the IRS is trying to encourage both employers and employees to save for retirement. So they're kind of giving you that tax advantage today, but it comes with some stipulations. They say that in order to, they say that if you take money out early, they'll penalize it, as Steve said. So that if you take money out before you're age 59 and a half, the IRS is going to encourage you not to do that, and so they say we're going to assess a tax penalty on an early withdrawal. So we just like to make sure that employees understand that, and they kind of have a long-term view on this type of account. Does that make sense? Anybody have any questions about how the mechanics work? Or
I know before we used to have a 401k here years ago. Right. Not one of these people were here except for me, I think. But so with the 401k, you could do like a loan. Can you do that with the IRA thing? No.
No.
Okay. I was just cool. Ask that question.
Yeah, there's no loan provisions on a simple IRA.
We actually think that's a good thing. Let me explain why. Sometimes when someone takes a loan out of a 401k, they have to pay that loan back, and they usually pay it back with pre-tax dollars, and then or post-tax dollars. I'm sorry. Yeah. And then that money goes back in the 401k, and then later they withdraw the money from the 401k and get taxed again. You end up kind of paying double tax on it.
That's one of the only ways I know of that you pay double tax.
Yeah,
never double.
It's
so.
I don't know, and it's interesting. If I have change in my pocket, if I have dollars in my pocket, somehow I spend it. I find a way to spend it. If I leave in the morning, I've got money in my pocket. I go home at night, and it's not there anymore. And if it's there, you tend to spend it. And it's just interesting. You notice it's just human behavior. It's common sense. And if we have access to a 401k and you can borrow the money, it sounds like such a good deal. And inevitably we can find reasons to do that. And then that becomes counterproductive and more destructive. You end up causing more damage. So anyway, I don't view that as a bad thing. I view it as a pretty healthy thing that there's not that loan provision available. So, but it's important to realize if you want to participate, and I think.
Do you want to talk about eligibility too, by the way? Who's eligible to participate?
Right, well, yeah, we'll talk about that just a second, but I think everybody should participate because, or seldom is there a reason not to. There may be some reasons not to, but to prepare for that time when you're not going to be working is important, and then you don't want to create damage along the way, by getting off track. And this is a really good plan to do that. Let me just mention one other thing about what Aaron said about the vesting schedule and so forth. This is such a generous plan from the employee perspective. And in fact, I think the majority of 401k plans we see today have no match. Those that do have a match, the employer keeps their clause on that money, the employer money, through a vesting schedule. They don't want employees that have only worked for a few years to get that employer match, and then they leave the employee and they take that money away. So they'll have this vesting schedule. With this plan, there is no vesting schedule. That means the employer match dollars, those are yours from day one. That's a generous thing. On the 401k plans that I have seen that do have a vesting schedule, do have a match, the most common match is a 50-cent match, 50% match on the dollars you put in, up to 6% of someone's pay. Okay, this plan that we're talking about, there's a 100% match up to 3%. And you say, it's only up to 3%. I know a 401k that does 50% up to 6%. I would rather have a 100% match up to 3% of my pay. Why is that? Because you can get all of the employer match by only having 3% of your pay contributed to the plan. Whereas with that 401k plan that has a 50-cent match up to 6% of your pay, to get the full match, you've got to contribute 6% of your pay to get it. So this, I would give an edge. I would rather have a 100% match up to 3% than I would a 50-cent match up to 6% of my pay. If you end up contributing 6% of your pay, the match is going to be the same either way. But to think you can still get all of that match with only 3% of your dollars is great. So that's a very generous. It's just a very generous plan from an employee perspective.
And the IRS won't let you put unlimited amounts into a retirement plan and take a huge deduction.
Right.
So the max you can put in is $12,500. That's as much as you can put in per year per employee.
You don't have to put that much in.
And you can put in as less as you want as well.
If someone is age 50 or older, there's a catch-up provision. They can do up to $15,500.
You might just be talking to me about that.
Yeah, right.
So, how much is the max that we can contribute? Say, 3% is the only one that is max, right?
3% is not the max. You can do more.
Up to how much?
The maximum you can put in is not a percentage of your pay, it's a dollar amount. So the maximum you can put in a calendar year that you can have deducted from your pay, not counting the employer match, just the dollars that you have deducted from your pay, the maximum that you can do in a year is $12,500 or $15,500
if you're over 50.
if you're age 50 or older. Yeah, that's the maximum you can put in.
Sometimes people ask us how much should they contribute, and it's kind of a personal question. It depends. I would think that you'll definitely want to get the full employer match. That's kind of free money in some from your perspective.
Yeah.
And that would be 3% of your pay. If somebody can afford to do more than that, I think it would be to their benefit just to save more for retirement.
I agree.
But I would strive to at least get the full match. But it kind of depends on, you could say you want to have, you could specify a dollar amount or a percentage. So you could say, oh, I'd like to have $25 come out of my paycheck every, do you guys get paid?
Weekly.
Weekly.
Oh, weekly, okay. So you can specify a dollar amount or a percentage. Most people do a percentage just to keep things consistent. And as their pay might increase or decrease, it's just kind of on a consistent basis.
But you don't have to, you can
Yeah, you
specify.
can specify a dollar amount, or you can do 1%, or, most people we see usually do 3%.
Well, at least, I would say, you know, a common question we get asked is, well, how much do I need to be saving today to have enough to support myself when I'm retired? And of course, that's an involved question that involves quite a few variables. But generally speaking, I think, and again, depending on your age, the younger someone is, the fewer dollars they need to put away because they have more time for it to grow. The older someone is, depending on how much they've already set aside, but they may need to put away a higher amount, you know, as they go on. But for a young person, I think, you know, 10 to 15% ought to be going in. When I say young person, I'm talking someone in their 20s or 30s. They ought to be doing 10 to 15, maybe 10 to 20% of their compensation ought to be setting aside into a retirement plan. I've met so many of our clients who have contributed to retirement plans over their lifetime and who have set money aside. And then when they're in retirement, they look back with such peace of mind. And not that money is the most important thing in life. It's not. There are other things more important than money. But to be able to not work and be able to pay their bills and support their family and keep food on the table is a wonderful thing. Yeah. And they just have peace of mind. And then I've met so many that are in that same period, and they don't want to work anymore. And sometimes they can't work anymore. And yet, they look back with regret because they didn't put enough aside. And they look back and they go, I could have done it, you know. I could have avoided, you know, you know, we all do it. We all spend money on things that are probably not needs, you know. There's nothing wrong with spending money on wants, don't get me wrong, but it's surprising how much the soda pop and the pizza and those kinds of things add up, you know, things that maybe we enjoy, but boy, if maybe we just cut back on a few things and rather put that money into your own account so you can have it. But I've seen so many people that are in retirement that just regret not preparing. So here's an opportunity where you can really prepare for the future. Yeah.
I was just going to say, I've prepared a spreadsheet with each one of your information in it. And so if you'd like to look at scenarios saying, you know, what if I put in $500 a month, or what if I put in $200 a month? What does the match look like? And what is the average percentage of return I think I'm going to get? And we can talk about that and what you think it might be. And then how many years you're going to leave it in there. And we can forecast how much it would be, you know, excluding the cost of penalties or payments, that type of thing. And then, you know, how much you actually contributed. And it's an amazing thing. You look at it and you put in, over the period of time, $20,000, and the account's got $300,000, $400,000. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
So I can sit down with any of you at any time, and we can play with those numbers and assist you in making a decision about how much you want to put in.
Yeah.
And then another consideration would be when you're looking at getting a raise, or when you get a raise in the future, just make a commitment now that half of that raise is going to go towards your retirement account, or all of it if you can, you know, skip a raise every other year or whatever it is, and put all of it towards that. You'll see that increase grow exponentially if you'll just make that investment.
That's a great suggestion. That's such a great suggestion. And it's hard sometimes because, again, we want as much money to spend as we can. And it's it's a matter of trade-offs, it really is. And so, you know, you can make decisions to go one way, but there are always consequences for our decisions. And this is a way you can, you know, maybe sacrifice a little bit today. Not entirely, we have to enjoy life today, but sacrifice a little bit. And I've never met anyone that's been in retirement that has contributed money to things like this, that has looked back and said, I wish I hadn't have done that. That's the dumbest thing I ever did. I've never heard that. That tells you something, you know? So do it. Okay, about eligibility. With this plan, every employee is going to be eligible on day one. So there's not going to be any waiting period before you can be eligible. So you can start contributing, you know, immediately, but you're not required to. So it's up to each. You have free agency, and you can decide for yourself what you want to do. But there is immediate eligibility. So that's I think that's another really good thing, very generous thing.
But do the employees have to be full time? Right?
No.
No.
No. You have to. Well, you have to earn at least $5,000. Or no, I'm sorry. 5,000. Yeah.
In a year.
In a year.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So if there's someone who wouldn't be earning 5,000, they could be excluded from the plan.
Okay.
So, yeah. So there's no part-time, full-time thing. So it's not.
I didn't know that. So
Yeah.
there's
Again,
some
that's
mention.
another thing. That's another thing that's very generous on the plan. We see many employers that you can understand why employers are trying to. Of course, I think they want to pay employees fairly, but they don't want to overspend on expenses and other kinds of things. And so you'll see employers commonly put restrictions into plans to limit the amount of dollars that the employer has to put in. And when we see those kinds of things here, we see the employer being very generous. There just aren't very many limits. It's a very generous plan. Dennis, did you?
I was just going to make the point that we could modify that plan later. Everyone in the room, everyone that's here now, is going to participate in the plan as it's being explained. If we decide later that we want to say someone needs to be here for a year before they participate, or they need to be a full-time person, or whatever, there are some restrictions that we can put.
Right.
But Dave and Claire have decided that that's not going to be the case for those of us who are here now. So, again, very, very generous, and something that we should consider as we're, you know, working for some of the greatest employers that there are out there.
Yeah. Let me just mention something about the investments, or the investment company that will be doing the investing of the money that goes into your retirement plans. We're using an investment company called American Funds. And I have asked people over the years whether they've ever heard of this investment company, American Funds. The common answer I hear is no, I've never heard of American Funds. That's a common answer. This company doesn't advertise. You don't see them in newspapers or on TV and in magazines and so forth. However, there has not been another investment company that has generated as good of investment returns as American Funds has. There are many great investment companies, but I would put American Funds not among the top in terms of their investment return, but at the very top. We have seen just really impressive investment returns, and that's the primary reason why we suggest that you use American Funds. We don't work for this company, American Funds. We're an investment dealer, and so we work with hundreds and hundreds of investment companies. You name the investment company, I'm sure we work with them. However, if someone were to ask us, okay, you can't say that all investment companies are good, and by the way, I don't say that, they're not all great, but you can't even say that, you know, if you had to name one investment company, which one would you say would be at the top of the list? And we would say American Funds. And it's not just because they have nice people that work for them, although they probably do. I mean, the people that we interact with are fine people. Or it's not that they have a good-looking logo, or that they they have a nice sounding name or whatever. It has nothing to do with any of that. It has to do with the investment return. It's just been so impressive. And in fact, let me just, this is interesting. This is an annual report, and you will receive an annual report for whatever investment fund you're using in the plan. It's a report from the investment company. American Funds is up here in the corner. And it's just a report to the people that have money in this fund to say, here's what we're doing with your money. Just so you know, here's what so this is the most recent one this is a fund called the Growth Fund of America. It's similar to one of these target date funds that would be maybe a 2030, 2040, 2050, a longer term target date fund would see similar results to what we've seen here. This is one of the component funds actually in all of the target date funds. So you see this fund appear along with many others in the target date funds. But this just happens to be the fund that our clients that have money with American funds, there's more money in this fund than any other investment fund. So it's a commonly used fund at our firm.
And it's one of the largest funds it's one of the largest mutual funds in existence. I think it's like a top 5 or
Yeah.
I'm sure a lot of your neighbors or people you know own, it's not a secret fund.
You do? There you go. Okay, yeah. It's not a...
Very, very widely used because of
widely
it's
used,
done
right.
really, really well.
Well, if you have money in this fund, you would have received this annual report, either electronically or in the mail.
I don't look at them because it just stresses me out.
Well, yeah, and that's
I don't want to know because it doesn't make any difference
It
to
doesn't
me.
make any difference, right.
So
Right.
my investment advisor said, you're going to get them. There's no reason to read them because
Right.
sometimes you're going to feel like a hero.
Right.
And other times you're going to feel like a heel. You're going to retire when you retire. Just don't worry
Exactly.
about it. But that's
Exactly.
not to dissuade you from
Well,
showing them this
I tell
rocket ship,
people that
because that's what this looks like right now.
a good use for this is as a sleep aid, actually.
Yeah.
If you can't fall asleep some night, just open it up and start reading it, and it's the most boring stuff in the world. You'll be snoozing. But anyway, it's interesting. In here, they show a chart of what the actual results have been.
It's a rocket ship.
Not what they could have been, not what we hoped that they would have been, but what they actually have been. What the actual investors that have invested in the fund actually received from the investment. And so this particular fund started in 1974, and on these charts they always use a hypothetical original investment of $10,000. But if someone would have put $10,000 into the fund, we don't have to go through the specifics here, but I'll just share with you the numbers. $10,000 put into the fund in 1974 and just left there.
37 years ago.
Right, 37 years ago.
Or 47.
I was gonna say it's
40.
47.
47.
I'm like, I graduated in 74, so.
Right.
So a long time ago.
So just left there, never added any money, never withdrew any money. Any idea how much that $10,000 would have grown to? Now, the number that I have is as of August 31st of 2017. That's the fiscal year end of this fund. We've actually seen increases subsequent to that, but we'll use that number nonetheless. But would 10,000 have grown to, would it have doubled?
1.8 million. I'm going to say 1.8 million.
1.8 million? Are you crazy?
2 million.
200,000.
I don't know.
200.
I'm just taking a wild shot.
That's actually a good guess.
Actually, it's a good guess. 2,467,000. Wow. That is almost unbelievable. It's almost unbelievable. How is that possible? But then we would say, is that good or is that bad? It sounds good. I mean, it is good. But is it really? One of the ways that we determine whether it's really a good return or not is we compare it to the market return. What did the market do as represented by the S&P 500, which is a measurement of just the overall market? What did the market average do? If the market average grew to 4 million over that same period of time, the same dollars in the beginning, then almost 2.5 million, even though it sounds good, may not be so good. Interestingly, I'll just share with you one other thing. There are two major ways that we can classify investments. We can classify them as passive investments or actively managed investments. What's the difference? A passive investment is one that just invests in a listing of stocks and bonds. We call that an index fund or something like that. So, as an example, an S&P 500 index fund will invest in whatever the 500 companies are in the S&P 500. Good, bad, or indifferent. If there's good companies in the S&P 500, you get those. If there's bad companies, you get those too. So an index fund will invest in whatever the companies are in that particular index. There's a bunch of different indexes that are used. The S&P 500 is the most common one. But it's a passive fund or a passive investment because there are not human beings who are doing research, who are looking in to, well, what are the 500 companies in the S&P 500? And are there some bad ones? And should we avoid investing in those? There are not people doing that on a passive fund. You just, whatever the S&P 500 is, you get it if it's an S&P 500 index fund. And now, like I said, there are other indexes as well. But those are passive. We call those passive investments. On the other side, there are actively managed investments. Actively managed investments are investments where there are human beings, so-called investment professionals, who are doing research and striving to only invest in the good things and avoid the bad things. Okay? Now here's the dirty little secret, and it's actually not a secret. It's a well-known fact. The average actively managed fund actually doesn't even do as well as the unmanaged index. Now, I tell that to people and they say, did I hear you correctly? Are you telling me that when an investment professional gets involved, that the returns actually are worse than if I just invested in an index fund where there are not investment professionals involved? Is that what you're telling me? That's exactly what I'm saying. Okay? So most actively managed investments don't even do as well as the unmanaged index. I've been an adjunct professor actually at Utah State University, and when students would ask me, well, where should I invest? I didn't want to get into, I'm not there to give investment advice and so forth, but I knew I could tell them, just invest in an index fund. I know that's good advice. I know they can't go wrong that way, and that's typically what I would tell them. Okay. Now, are these American funds? Are they actively managed or are they passive funds? They're actively managed. Now you may be saying, wait a second, you just said that actively managed funds don't perform as well as an index fund, and yet you're telling us to invest in an actively managed fund. Yes, that's exactly what I said, and that is exactly what I'm suggesting that you do and that you will do with this plan. But here's the important detail. American Funds is not an average actively managed fund. Again, the average actively managed fund underperforms the index. But it's rare, but there are some actively managed investment companies that have outperformed the index. American Funds is a great example of this. And this is where I'm going to. So now, back to Growth Fund of America. Over that 40-plus year period of time, $10,000 grew to $2,467,000. But we said, is that good or bad? Well, what did the S&P 500 do over the same time period? If the S&P 500 did better, and by the way, most actively managed funds will underperform the S&P 500, so we'll see a higher dollar amount with the S&P 500. What did the S&P 500 do over the exact same time period? I've got the answer right here. The S&P 500 grew to 951,000. That's awesome. 951,000. That's awesome, especially considering most actively managed funds don't even do that well. So that's awesome. But compared to 2,467,000, wow. I mean, that's just a huge difference. That's just one example of many that illustrates this American Funds Group. It's not a rinky-dink little investment company. I guess that's kind of what I'm telling you. It's truly a world-class investment company. If I were in your shoes, I would want to know that as you participate and as you have money go into the fund, you're not having money go into just a fly-by-night, rinky-dink little investment company that has no proven track record. It's just the opposite. There is no investment company that I'm aware of that has a better track record than we see at American Funds. This is just one example. I've got their oldest fund goes back to 1934, and we see that. But it's interesting, we don't see this outperformance happen every single year. And the effect of it is not that great in, over 2 or 3 or 5 year time horizons. But over time, you see the difference widen, and as we look at the performance of Growth Fund of America, that outperformance, 2,467,000 versus 951,000, that didn't happen overnight. That happened over a long period of time. But the point is that it's impressive, and especially over the long run, it's
one way to wrap your mind around it too. It's you could think of what's the average annual return been on that fund?
It's been
13.42%.
13.42%.
Yeah, and so in other words, that fund has doubled your money, just over 5 years. On average, just over five years. So you can think of it, if you put in 10,000, just over 5 years, it would double to 20,000, and then 20 to 40, and then 40 to 80, and then 80 to 160,000, so forth and so on. So you can kind of see the trend, the exponential trend that it has. So then in these later years, if 1 million doubles in 5 years to 2 million, and then 2 million to 4 million. So this is really where you get that exponential scale. But you can think of it in those terms. It's easier to wrap your mind around it. If you get an average annual return of 10%, this has done better than that. It's been about 13.5% on average. But if you can get a 10% return, then your money will double about every 7.2 years. So that's one way to kind of think about it, as you're just running some quick numbers in your head or planning on what you could expect.
And again, there is a correlation between long-term return and volatility. In other words, the investments that generate the best long-term returns also have higher than average volatility. It's kind of common. As a matter of fact, in this Growth Fund of America, we think, wow, that's great, 10,000 growing to 2,467,000, I'll take that.
Yeah.
But if you look at the detail along the way, guess what? In the first year it was in existence, in 1974, the very first year, it was down 21%. So the $10,000 that went in, at the end of the year, is worth $7,900.
We had clients that were...
We did. We've got some clients. And so you see that the first year, you're going, that's a horrible fund. I'm going to get my money out before I lose it all. This is the attitude that people have. We would suggest to them, kind of like what Dennis said, yeah, that'll happen, but just stay the course. Don't watch it too close. But many people will bail. Let me just go along. In 1988, it was down 11%. In 1990, it was down 10%. 2 out of 3 years, it was negative there. In 2001, it was down 25%. 2002, down 20%. So back-to-back years there. 2008, it was down 8%. 2009, down 17%. So these downs happen. I'll tell you though, 1978, it was up 62%. 1999, up 61%. 2000, up 53%. And then there were many years up 20%, 15, 30, So there's both good and bad. The cumulative effect looks very impressive, but when you look, at the detail, sometimes the detail has some negative things in it. Have you ever heard someone say, you don't want to see how sausage is made? The sausage tastes good, it's really good, but if you saw the detail, it might make you sick. This is kind of like sausage in the sense that the long-term return is awesome, it's great, but if you look at the detail along the way, it can make you sick. Because, boy, there's been some bad years. There's been really good years too, both, but that's the case. Let me just mention one other thing, and then Aaron's passing out some paperwork. Well, I'm not sure if any of you have heard of this group. You can't really see it. A group called Morningstar. Morningstar is I don't know if you recognize that logo, but Morningstar is an independent company that provides research and information about the investment world. this is what they do. They monitor the investment world and they provide data. For example, they're the ones that do the star rating system for investment funds. So someone may hear about an investment fund that's a 5-star fund. Well, that's Morningstar that provides that star rating. A 5-star fund, 4-star, the more stars the better. You know, that's Morningstar that does that. So this is their business, to provide information and opinions about the investment world. This is what they do. They are fiercely independent, Morningstar is. In other words, they're not affiliated with any investment company. Can you imagine if they were affiliated with a particular investment company, and then they just happen to give good opinions about that investment company? We'd say, well, that's not legitimate. You guys are affiliated with them. Of course you're going to say good things about them. So they don't do that. They are fiercely independent. They're not affiliated with any investment company. Well, once per year, Morningstar comes out with their fantastic list. This is a list of investments that Morningstar says these are truly fantastic. There are, I believe, about 10,000 different investment funds in the world today. So literally thousands and thousands of investment funds out there. What Morningstar tries to do once per year is they want to whittle that down to just a small group of funds that Morningstar says are fantastic. So they do this every year, and the number of funds that make the cut varies each year from maybe 40 to 50 investment funds make the cut out of 10,000. So we're looking at just a small elite group. Most investment companies have no funds on the list. As you can appreciate, with only 40 to 50 funds making the cut, most companies don't have even one fund. If an investment company can have one fund on the list, that's impressive, you know, if you can have one. There are a few investment companies that have multiple funds on the list. There's one investment company that has had more funds on the list than any other, and that's American Funds. The most recent listing is the 43 fantastic funds. We call them the Fantastic 43. This is the current list. Of those 43 funds, you know how many are American funds? 13. 13 of the 43. Now, you may think, well, that's okay, so what? No, that's really, really impressive. We just don't see that with other investment companies. So it's not just us saying this, that, you know, American Funds is a really good investment company. I mean, it's Morningstar is saying it, the results say it. So again, if I were in your shoes, I'd wanna know that. This is an interesting piece, and I know this there's some detail on this, but this asks the question, does your target date series have fantastic underlying funds? Remember how I said these target date funds consist of, you know, maybe 20 to 30 underlying investment funds? Well, does it contain some of these fantastic funds? Are they in your target date funds? And we look at some very impressive investment companies. Vanguard. Vanguard is an investment company. I have tremendous respect for Vanguard, a very good investment company. Their expertise mainly is in the index fund area. How many fantastic funds do they have in their target date fund? They have target date funds, like American Funds. Well, 0. That doesn't mean Vanguard's a bad investment company. They're a very good investment company, but the fact is, they don't have any of these fantastic funds in there, which is not a surprise. Most companies don't. Fidelity, another very good investment company. How many fantastic funds do they have in their target? They have none. T. Rowe Price, another very good. These investment companies, Vanguard, Fidelity, T. Rowe Price. These are in that top elite group, in my opinion, of really good, solid investment companies. But the fact is, Fidelity doesn't have any fantastic funds in their target date series. What about T. Rowe Price? They've got 2. That's good, you know. Well, how many does American Funds have? 13. You know, again, just another thing that says it's very impressive. So, yeah. This is the plan that you'll have available to us. The point I'm making is that, you know, this investment company is a sound, solid, highly respected, world-class investment organization. Frankly, I don't know how someone could do better at this point than with American Funds. Now, we always have to say Past performance is no guarantee of the future. We'll see how things play out. Just because American funds has been so impressive historically, is that a guarantee that that will continue? It's not a guarantee. But as I see that over decades and decades and decades of time, and there's a system in place with the way they do things. I'm sure you guys have a way that you do things, a system that's in place, you know, a culture, and to the extent that can be repeated, I'm cautiously optimistic that that kind of thing's going to continue going forward. And we've seen this repeated, you know, time and time again. So, okay.
Is that the only investment company you guys work for is American Funds?
It's not the only one that we work for. So we deal with hundreds and hundreds of investment companies. But it's the investment company that is available for you.
Oh, I see.
It's the only one available in
Through this plan.
Right.
I see.
Right. Now, along those lines, people will say, well, I don't want to, getting back to that, having all your eggs in one basket, some will say, I don't want to have all my eggs invested with American funds. You know, I want to diversify. You're not investing, and you won't be investing in American funds. You won't own any ownership in American funds. You don't have stock in American funds. Your money will be invested in the investment funds that are managed by American funds. You'll actually be investing in the underlying holdings of the funds at American funds. So you'll have hundreds, if not thousands, of underlying holdings. And whether American funds survives or not will have no impact on the return that that you'll see.
Oh, I see.
So, yeah. Yes.
Steve, do these funds have any management fees or
Absolutely.
those associated with them, and how are those assessed?
Right. So there are expenses built in. In fact, there's no such thing as an investment that doesn't have some kind of expenses. So we can't avoid expenses, but this is another thing that we believe is really important, is to keep expenses low. Okay? So we are going to be using in this plan, there's different share classes, and each share class will reflect a different level of expense and timing of expenses. There are some share classes that have a load or an upfront charge on them. There are others that might have a back-end charge, a back-end load. If you withdraw money, you get hit with another charge. All investment funds have expenses along the way. With this particular plan, we're using the share class called F2 shares. These are among the least expensive, the lowest expenses at American funds. The expense per fund varies from fund to fund, from maybe about 0.2% up to maybe 0.4 or 0.5%, depending on the fund. Some of the global funds are a little bit more expensive to manage. They might have slightly higher expenses. I believe they're all less than 0.5%. Some are as low as 0.2%, so kind of in that range. And then we have an investment advisory fee. The industry average for investment advisory fees is about 1.2, 1.3%. Ours in this plan is 0.5%. So the total expense will end up being, maybe 0.8, 0.9% annually in the fund. So you don't see all of those expenses, but they are built into the fund. We think it's important to keep expenses low, and that's about as low as you'll be able to find on expenses. We also think it's important, although it's important to look at expenses, it's very important to look at expenses. That should be looked at in conjunction with performance, with investment performance. If we only looked at expenses, we would only invest in index funds because they have the very lowest expenses. Index funds, since there's no humans involved, will have expenses at maybe 0.1% or something, 0.1%. So these will have higher expenses than that. By the way, the information we showed you on the returns at Growth Fund of America, that takes into account expenses. And in fact, those expenses are higher than what the expenses in the plan will be. And when we compared it against the S&P 500, by the way, the S&P 500 was not burdened with expenses. So that's kind of not a fair comparison, you know, so you can invest in the S&P 500 without incurring expenses, and yet in this comparison that we had, that 10,000 growing to 2,467,000 for Growth Fund of America, that was burdened with expenses, but the S&P 500 growing from 10,000 to 951,000 actually was not burdened with expenses. That's kind of not fair, you know, to not burden, because you would have had to incur some expenses to invest in the S&P 500, and yet that wasn't. So we gave the benefit of the doubt to the S&P 500.
We did look at that, Eric, when we were shopping plans about what we would bring here. We did look at that and take that into consideration. Charles Schwab's index fund was the lowest that we could find, and maybe it's not the lowest in the world, but that's the lowest we found. But then when we looked at the expenses that they were offering and the potential returns, we felt that this was the better plan to bring.
Yeah.
Now, we're not any better at it than anybody else,
Right.
but we did take time to look at it before we invited Harold Dance to be our guys.
And that is important. I mean, we think that's really, really important to, you know, to look at expenses. That's an important component. There are some investments and some retirement plans that have expenses
In excess of
2% per year, 3%. I've seen some in excess of 4% per year. You might think that doesn't sound like much, you know, it's only a small. The cumulative effect of that over time is really significant. If you've ever looked at a mortgage and a 30-year mortgage at 5%, and then you look at the mortgage payment, if the interest rate was at 4% versus 5%, it's only 1% difference, right? That doesn't make much of a difference. But if you look, it makes a big difference on the payment. If you've ever looked at that, even 1% on the interest rate, that same effect comes in on the investment expenses. You know, if we can keep investment expenses low, that just leaves more money in your account.
To grow. The
To
more
grow.
that's taken out, the less it grows.
Right, correct. Right. So we think it's best to certainly look at expenses, but also look at the investment performance and find the best balance of the two. We think that's the best way to look at it. So.
One other way to look at things, I heard somebody say that the stock market is the only place where people freak out when things go on sale.
So true.
When the market goes down and the cost of a stock goes down and the investment portfolio looks like it's going down, nobody wants a part of that sale.
Right.
And you just have to remember that when that's on sale, smart companies like American funds are buying up shares because they know invariably winter will end and spring will come again and they'll have more ownership. So
That's absolutely right. And another interesting statistic that supports that attitude, the average return on the stock market, just the average return over the last more than 100 years has been just about 9%, maybe slightly under 9%. Okay, that's just the average return, just no better, no worse than what the average is. But what about the average person who has invested in the investment market? What has their return been? You would think that the average person who invests would get close to the market average. Some might do a little bit better, some might do a little bit worse, but on average, you would expect the average investor to get about the same as the market average, you would think. And yet the data is so clear on this. The average individual investor achieves a return of about a third. We're looking just over 3% average annual return versus a market of close to 9%. Why is that? Why is it that the average person generates a return far lower, not just a little bit lower, we're talking far lower than the market average? And I think it's what Dennis has said. It's that it's psychologically, people don't like volatility. And when the market goes down and things are on sale, people end up pulling money out because they don't want to lose all of their money. And you've heard the old saying, buy low, sell high, you know? It's kind of a humorous way to look at it, but I guess it makes sense. Buy low, sell high. Too many people do the opposite. They'll buy high and they sell low. When the market is high and the economic news is good, people are willing to invest, and then when it's bad, they'll end up doing just the opposite when things are on sale in the investment market, because the headlines are negative. When the market is down, the economy is usually not as good. The headlines are usually negative, and people sometimes think the world is coming to an end, and you better get your money out before you lose it all. That can be a very dangerous attitude from an investment standpoint. I'll tell you what Warren Buffett does. Warren Buffett, you may know that name. He's one of the wealthiest people in the world. All of Warren Buffett's wealth has come from investing. So he didn't really start a company, although he has an investment company called Berkshire Hathaway, but that company is an investment company. So he didn't start Apple or Microsoft or a company like that. He just invested. That's how he earned all of his money. But if you look at what he does, he has exhibited great wisdom in the way that he invests. And he invests in things, and then you know what he does? He just holds on to it. He doesn't buy and sell. He doesn't move money around. He's not trying to time the market, and he'll be the first to admit you can't time the market. No one can. Not even Warren Buffett, arguably the most successful investor of all time. I've heard him say on numerous occasions, when asked, what's the market going to do this year? In 2018, Warren Buffett, what's the market going to do? I know what his answer is because I've heard him say it. I have no idea. He doesn't know. And he'll also say, and I don't care, because it's irrelevant, really, over time. And I think that says something. And even though we might not have billions of dollars like Warren Buffett does, we can emulate his behavior. And so we can do similar things to what he does. And what he does is that he invests in good things, and then he stays the course. And you have that very opportunity, with this plan. Invest in good things, stay the course. You'll be rewarded. Not every year, not every month, but over time. Yeah. All right. So if you would like to participate, there's some paperwork. Anything else we had to cover, Aaron?
I don't think so.
Did we cover?
I just have a question.
Or any questions? Yeah.
Yeah, so once I enroll and, does this account become mine? Let's say in 5 years I move to California, would I take this with me?
You would. In fact, it becomes yours on day one. Even when the first money goes in. You'll notice when you get your statement, it'll have your name on it. It will have the Aztech name, I think, on the statement because it's just an employer-sponsored plan. But it's your money. It will stay with you. If you end up moving somewhere, the account goes with you. Aztech will have no
Aztech
information.
Can be able to see the account.
They won't be able to see it.
They can add to it while you're working here.
But they can't
once
see
the
what's
money's
in there.
in.
Once the money is in, it's your money.
I see. So let's say I move and I get another job, would I be able to still add to it myself?
Yes, we can. We can modify the account. It's called a simple IRA, is the technical name of the account now. To be able to add to it, we would just take the word simple off. We would change the account to just a regular individual retirement account, into which you could contribute if you wanted to.
I see.
You probably wouldn't want to add the account to a new employer's plan, although that is possible. You could roll it into a new employer's plan, but you probably wouldn't want to do that because employer plans are usually, there might be a few more restrictions on those than you have in your own individual retirement account. So what will probably, you can just leave it the way it is. If you were to move, just leave. There's nothing you need to do, but if you want to start contributing to it, we just have to take the simple name off. There's just a form you would sign to do that, and then you could contribute to it going forward. But it'll follow you wherever you go.
Okay. And let's say I pass on in a couple years.
Yeah, good question.
Could I leave it for my daughter?
Absolutely.
Oh.
You can leave it to whoever you want.
Okay.
So in the paperwork that we have, you will designate whoever you want to be your beneficiary in the account.
DENNIS. Actually, I filled that part out for everybody. It's stamped in there already. Don't worry about that.
Okay.
So you can do that, and then of course all of this stuff can be modified. So you could name a particular person or people today as beneficiaries, and then circumstances could change at some point in the future, at which time you might want to change that, and you can do that at any time you would like. You might set the investment to be something today, that the money may be one of those target date funds, but then for whatever reason, you feel you want to change that, no problem. That can be changed and modified along the way. The dollars that you contribute, you can set that to be a certain amount today, and then in the future you might want to change that. You can change that. I think that's going to be quarterly. You can't change it more than quarterly just because there's a burden, or could be a burden on the payroll, people that do the payroll, constantly changing, so we don't want to have that happen. But nonetheless, you have flexibility to modify that. You're not locked into that forever. So there's just a lot of flexibility on the plan. You can contribute, you can stop contributing. You know, if you know the tires need replacing, and you just need to pay for it from money, you might want to stop for 3 months contributing to the plan. You could restart that later. So
I see.
that's, again, if I were in your shoes, I like flexibility. I like having the ability to customize what I do based, what you do based on your circumstances. You should name who you want to be a beneficiary, and everybody else can do the same. There is a really cool beneficiary designation that's available if you want to use it. And we'll go through it in the paperwork here in a second, but if you're married and have children, and if you want your money to stay in your family line, if that's the desire, I'm not saying it has to be or should be, it's up to you what you want to do with your own money. But if you're in that case, there's a really cool beneficiary designation that names your beneficiaries by position, not by name. So it says your beneficiary will be your spouse. In the event you have no spouse, your beneficiary will be your children equally. And then it even goes on from there. If any child predeceases you, the deceased child's share will go to his or her children, your grandchildren. So this is a beneficiary designation that's nice. If you end up having additional child or children in the future, the day those children are born, they're added as a beneficiary. If you end up being a grandparent, and I can tell you that comes faster than you might think. I've got 7 grandchildren now, and the moment those grandchildren are born, they're immediately a 3rd level of a beneficiary. So that's a cool one if someone's married, has children, and they want their money to stay in their family line. It's not for everybody, but in that circumstance, it's a cool beneficiary designation. Otherwise, you can name whoever you want. You can name multiple people as beneficiaries in varying percentages. So it doesn't always have to be equal. So we'll go through that. So in order to participate, there's these 2 forms that need to be.
3.
There's really 3. Okay. So the first form, Aaron, it's this one right here?
Yeah, here.
Okay. So the first form is this one right here. It's a multiple page form. We've kind of crossed out some of the things that don't need to be completed.
Most of this doesn't apply. I've crossed it out.
So if you turn over on section 2 of this form, if you want to participate, you would need to put in your information there. Your social security number, date of birth, name, and address, and country of citizenship. Okay? That's if you want to participate. Then
All I do is sign.
Then all you would do is sign on page 8 after you put your money here. If some of you are unsure as to whether or not you want to participate, maybe you're saying, "Cal, I don't know if I want to, maybe I should." One thing you could do, you could complete the paperwork. We could get you set up so that your retirement account is set up and available for you to put money into. And then maybe after you think about it, you decide, "Oh, I'm not going to participate." Well, that's fine. You don't have to have money going. But then if you do decide to participate, the account will be there, and you can, and money can go into it. So, I guess what I'm saying is, it won't hurt you to complete the paperwork today if you decide that you end up not wanting to put money in. But it will save some administrative time. If in the future then you do decide you want to put in, then the account's there and available. And
Do we have to sign it today?
no, you don't have to.
Okay.
No. But it might, all I'm saying is that then if down the line you decide you do want to, there might be a little bit of a delay in getting things set up for you. That's the only thing.
Okay.
So if you're paid every week and you decide right now, you complete the paperwork, the account's set up, ready to go, but then you decide not to put in your money in.
Sign there.
But then in 3 weeks,
And
you
then-
do, boom, we
and
can
then this is
we can
your,
get money going into the account immediately.
The
Whereas,
beneficiary designation is right
If you
here.
don't complete the
Okay.
paperwork now, that's fine, if you don't want
check
to.
that box. for
Then
the
3
default.
weeks down the line, you say,
can
yes,
leave
I
default.
now wanna start putting money in.
Okay.
Okay, well, we gotta get the paperwork in, we gotta get you set up, and that might take a little bit of time, there might be a little bit of a delay, that's all I'm saying, so.
Right.
But do what you want, I don't wanna force anybody to do anything they don't wanna do.
No one leaves this room until everyone,
This is this one-page document I passed out. This is where you'll decide how much you want to contribute to the plan. You can list a percentage there. I can show you how that. You can leave, just enter your name here, and then we can fill out the name of the employer. And then for example, in box A, you could say there's a box for a percentage or a dollar amount. And so if you wanted to do 3%, for example, you just check that box and write in the number 3, and then sign the bottom. And we'll give this to whoever does payroll here. Okay, there you go. So you're gonna get probably a collection of these, and we can work together on. And then we'll get everything set up in the system online, and you can go in and just have that amount deducted from your pay each pay period. And like I said, this is for the initial enrollment. But this could be changed every quarter. So if you're doing 3% now, and you decide that you want to up it or reduce it in the future, you can just talk to, what was your name?
Kelly.
Kelly, yeah, and change that every quarter. And then I didn't talk about this.
Kelly, they said it was for
Wait,
Aztech
no,
materials.
let's-
Yeah, make sure
we gotta
Aztech
jump.
materials, not Aztec.
On this first packet,
There you go.
this first packet of information, on the last page of that,
Or just leave it on another one.
I'm looking at section 1
I bet
here.
inspections is specific.
That's fine. We can complete this.
We'll-
We'll keep
we'll
it
complete.
consistent. That's fine.
So I don't have to do this?
Yeah, don't do that. And then we will want to fill out this.
This
I can
last
help you in a second.
piece of,
Okay.
the last page of this document here, it's got stapled together several pages. The last page, it's a separate page, front and back. In section 3 of that page, that is where you will specify how your money is to be invested, okay? This is where you could choose for your money to go into one of the target date retirement funds. I don't know if you can see that there, but that's where you would specify the year associated with your, I think that's a really good way to go personally. Just pick a year, and again, these were in 5-year increments, so 2030, 2035, 2040, 2045, and so forth. What I would probably suggest most of you do is pick a year that's the next 5-year incremental year after you're age 65. So think of what year you would turn 65, and then round up to the next either 5 year that ends with a 5 or a 0, and use that as a target date fund. In my opinion, that's a great way to go.
I did.
Yeah. I think that's a great way to do it. Alternatively,
Short savings plan.
there are individual funds. We haven't spent the time to go over what those are. We're happy to do it. If anyone has questions about that, you could have your money go into specific investment funds. That Growth Fund of America that I showed you, that's one fund, one out of 30 or 40 that are available. So someone could customize their funds if they want to. That's fine if you would like. By the way, this can be changed over time, so just because you select one thing today or whenever it is you complete your paperwork doesn't mean you're stuck with that. That can be changed. But I just have to tell you, from my perspective, those target date funds is a really, really good way to go. You know, unless there's a compelling reason not to do that, that's what I would suggest most people do, if you want my opinion.
60 is the soonest we can pull out without being.
60, he's
59 and a half.
Technically, 59 and a half. Politicians must have done the 59 and a half thing. So, what is your age?
33.
33. So, so you've got 16 and a half years before you could pull the money out without penalty. Okay. So.
It is liquid though, it is accessible, so you can make a withdrawal immediately, you know. It is a liquid investment,
It is.
but there is that tax penalty on an early withdrawal
Yeah.
that we hesitate to take money out early.
Some people have told me, I wish you hadn't have told us that this is a liquid investment. You should have said, no, you cannot get your money out. But we have to be transparent. And the fact is, you could withdraw money at any time along the way. But I would just give a big red flag warning, you know. You guys are too young to remember. Dennis.
Seriously?
I don't know if you'll remember. There used to be a TV show, a weekly show called Lost in Space.
Oh, you
Oh, I went on
bet.
the set.
You
Danger.
You did?
I got
What?
autographs. of
Oh, you did?
autographs
Okay.
Of the people.
All right. So they had this robot. Remember? They had this robot.
Yes.
Danger,
Remember
Will
what?
Robinson.
Danger, danger. He would wave his arm. It was a dorky looking robot they had in this thing. This is back in the 60s and 70s. And this robot would say, danger, danger.
60s.
And it was really pretty humorous. So when it comes to withdrawing money from your simple plan,
Danger.
I'm going to be the robot. Danger, danger.
Danger,
You know,
here we go.
yeah. I'm going to, I'm just, even though you can do it,
Should be the absolute last resort.
it ought to be
should-
absolute last resort. Don't do it. Yeah, exactly.
On the one page, it has an employer contact.
Yeah.
What do you want everybody to put down?
You know what? We
Yeah,
can
that's it.
enter
Kelly
that.
R.
They told us
Rushton.
not to fill it
That
out.
section says to be filled out by.
Yeah, to be completed by the employer.
Well, that
Oh,
would probably
right.
be me.
We'll,
That's what I'm saying. Do you want everybody?
when we get the
I'm gonna
plan
tell them to fill
document
it out.
completed,
Okay.
that'll be included on the plan document. We'll just make sure it's consistent.
Okay.
We can actually
Okay.
complete that part of it.
Alright.
So,
Perfect.
and then,
So I'm 37, so do what, 20,
I would do,
48?
let me see here.
2050.
Right?
Yeah.
you were born in what year?
80,
80? Oh, yeah.
2050?
So I'm gonna go
It's like
1980
far.
at 65,
Long.
2045, yeah, round up to 2050. Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. I think that's great. I think that'd be a great way to go. Now,
The main reason we recommend that, as opposed to specific underlying funds, we'd be happy to do as well,
yeah,
is that sometimes if you do specific underlying funds, and then you maybe forget to change those along the way, it's usually consistent with most people that they need to be a little bit more conservative as they approach their retirement date.
right.
And these target date funds already do that, and they actually do a really, really good job of
They do.
doing that.
They
As
do.
good of a
They're-
job as we could do
They're
manually.
You're right. They're just.
And it's just a cost-effective way to streamline that approach.
Right,
And so it's just that's what I use in my own. And we do
Right.
this for a living.
right. Me too.
The reason it becomes more conservative is because you don't want the volatility of a 21% decrease on the year that you retire.
Exactly.
Because all of a sudden, you've been growing like this, and then you go to retire,
And now you're taking
And-
money out, right?
and it went to the toilet that month, so that's why you take it and be more conservative at the end, so it's less volatile.
On the very last page of this multi-page document, I'm going to turn it around on the very back page. This is where you designate the beneficiary. So you've got that right in front of you. So this is where, as you can see in section 4, there's two parts, either A or B. A is that beneficiary designation, that automatic default that I mentioned, I think makes sense in cases where people are married, either have children or might have children. That stays in the family line. I think that's a great way to go. Alternatively, if you want to name specific people, and then you would complete section B, and then you can have primary or contingent.
Do we need to get spouse signature, is that required in the mail?
If you don't list your spouse, State of Nevada, I'm not sure.
I'm not sure what,
I think so.
Yeah, you
I
know,
would, yeah, so if you don't name a spouse as at least a 50% beneficiary, then the spouse would need to sign and give spousal consent to that.
But as a contingent beneficiary, I mean, if spouse is 100% primary,
Oh,
and then
no,
contingent.
then you've already done it, then you don't need to consent, yeah. If you named a spouse as a primary, 50% or higher as a primary, or the default beneficiary designation names the spouse too as the primary beneficiary, then you don't need a spousal consent.
Yeah, we almost always recommend the default beneficiary designation.
Well, in
Like,
cases where
when it's,
applicable,
in most cases, people want their money to go to their spouse and their kids.
if they're married, yeah,
If that's
and have
the
kids.
situation, it's
Right.
good to check that as opposed to listing individuals. Just
In fact-
because if a child dies, or if you have more children, they're automatically included in that. You don't have to update the beneficiary
And in
designation.
fact,
We have a
even-
lot of clients that sometimes forget to update their beneficiary designation.
Right.
They forgot about their youngest kid. Turns out, he's not a beneficiary, he or
Right,
she.
yeah,
and then
that's the problem.
If they pass away, so sometimes that can be an issue, but we like that default because it automatically expands and contracts.
even if someone is not married, but has children, and they want their money to go to their children equally, you could select that default beneficiary designation. Because what it says is your beneficiary will be your spouse. But in the event you have no spouse, so if you don't have a spouse,
kids,
then it goes to the children equally. And then it goes beyond the children, then it goes to grandchildren, which is a nice thing because then it expands, if your children end up having children of their own, that's a nice thing. So you don't necessarily have to be married to have that default beneficiary designation be appropriate.
Okay, now I have a question, because I'm looking on here and there's an effective date, but we have to have time to get all this stuff set up. So what would be the earliest effective date that you would want
Should we
people to
leave
check
that,
out?
have them leave that blank for now and then keep that consistent as well? We're gonna do this, as quick as we
oh.
can. I'm sure you guys are anxious to get,
Now-
and
Yeah.
that's right
I'm
here.
just kinda looking on the administrative side for what I have to do, so.
Yeah.
You know.
What that's designed to do is for an employee to come to you and say, I want to start contributing, but not until that date.
Right, but I'm saying for this initial thing.
Right.
Cause I gotta get it all set up in our payroll site, and
Correct.
there's just lots we've got to do, so.
Correct.
I don't want someone to say they want to start this week, is what I'm trying to say.
Right, right.
Because it won't be set
It
up.
won't be.
If you leave it blank, it will be as soon as possible.
As soon as administratively
Yeah.
possible.
If you want it to start later, then you put a date down for later. Is that fair?
Yeah,
And then if you wanna do a percentage or a dollar amount, this is where you'll specify.
And if you guys want to go through any of that to see what your
Yeah.
we
will
wanna
look
meet
like,
with you.
Well, yeah, so we know what to put down.
I can do that.
Yeah. And
We can
it'll,
look at it.
what'll take 5 minutes?
It'll take no time at all.
Yeah, so-
It's all set up right now. We could
Yeah.
walk in there
Yeah.
and look at any of you individually.
Okay.
But 3% is absolutely the minimum you should
Yeah.
hit.
Uh-huh.
But if you want to look at, if you can bear
Yeah.
more, then you
Yeah,
should,
that's
because
right.
it's significant, the changes over time.
You probably don't know that.
If
off
we
the
look
top
at
of your head.
2050 for
That's
you, or
pretty
the
good, you
amount
do all this.
of years that you'll have that money in there. And if we look at a conservative
We
return,
can,
I shouldn't say conservative, but
I was gonna say,
you wanna
can
say, I think
take
it'll be
this with us.
7%, I think it'll be
And then
8%.
if you wanna
I think I'll
call
match
me,
the market at
then
9%,
Put that in.
then
I
you
should
can
have
look
a
at
good way to
that.
get it today.
Okay.
You can decide.
Dennis, for planning purposes,
Ask my wife.
I always
Okay, we could
use
always write that in.
conservative investment return numbers
Yeah,
for planning,
sure.
just because I would rather be surprised
Right.
on the upside
We're gonna find
than the other way.
5 to 7%, is that?
Yeah, I think, yes, I think, yeah, 5 to 7 is a good conservative. If we can, if the numbers can look good using those return numbers, then I'm gonna be very comfortable
Okay.
that it's probably gonna be better than that.
Well, and again, this isn't meant to be a forecast that you're gonna come back and hold me to.
Right,
It's just to give you an idea of what the growth can look like over time.
correct.
Could look like, so. And also what your pay will look like if you do it now. Because I've built in what it looks like to have your pre-tax money taken out,
Yeah,
what your
to see what my
paycheck will
check
look
will
like.
look like, yeah, that's awesome. That'll be easier.
I'll help you look
I'm
at
sorry I
that.
didn't add you to my list of people.
Well, just hand me the paperwork, I'm gonna put it on anyway.
I scratched out the stamp.
That's fine.
You can leave that section 2 blank, we'll get that completed. Section 3, that's where you're going to specify what particular fund you want to use. If you want to use one of those target date funds, which we would probably recommend, you would check that box right underneath the number 3, right there, check that box, and then can you see right below, there's a place to enter the year.
Yeah, I don't know what year it is.
I can help you with that. What year
I'm
were you?
33 years old.
So you're
Born
born
in
in
1984.
84? So
Mine was
what
easy.
I'm gonna take 1984, I'm gonna add 65 to it. That gets me 2049. You can go 2050. I would round up to the next highest. Yeah.
Turn 65.
Also,
We can always modify that, so you're not locked into it, but I think that would be a great way to go. That'll be a relatively aggressive investment fund, which is the whole point. You've got time. It should be aggressive, in my opinion,
You don't think so?
and in the opinion of the target date fund. So we don't worry so much about volatility, when you're in your 30s or 40s or 50s, because
I don't know.
you're not going to be using this until later. So that's the whole thinking behind it.
yeah. Also, if I wanted to like divide it, the 3%, like could I put like 1% in the American funds?
I know she's.
What was the name of that blue sheet?
The growth
Oh,
fund.
the growth fund.
The growth fund?
Absolutely.
Yeah, could I put like 1%
Here's-
there, and then 1% in another really good one?
Absolutely.
Oh,
Absolutely. You can, but the way we would do that is that down below in section 3, you can do the target date fund 100%, or you can divide it out among different funds down below.
oh,
So, as an example, you could check that second box in section 3, where you specify individual fund, and you could put 2050 fund, 50%, Growth Fund of America, 25%, and then some other fund, 25%. So what that would do, it would divide out the dollars that you put in. Half of them, in my example, would go into the 2050 fund, half of them into these other 2 funds. That's how you would do that.
oh, I see.
But that could be done at any time. You could start putting it all in the 2050 fund in a month, or a few months, or a year. You could decide, hey, to make a change. Also, you can call us, we'll be happy to help make those changes.
Don't worry about that.
Or,
That's their fee, right?
we'll have regular visits here. We'll schedule those when we're here in Vegas. We're here multiple times during the year, and we could visit about it then and make those changes.
Oh, okay.
So
Do I keep
you'll
this
have the
paper?
flexibility. I'm sorry?
Do I keep this paper?
No, we need that one signed as well, just on the second page.
So we just have to sign and put our name at the top under client,
Right.
right?
Uh-huh.
But we don't have to worry anything about the percentages
No,
over on the right.
it is what it
fine.
is, right.
And this is my name.
Right, correct.
Just leave it blank for right now, yeah.
Yeah, effective date, if you leave it blank, it means as soon as possible.
Yeah. So that means it might
Yeah,
take
you
us
can
a
leave
couple
that
weeks to get
blank.
this all set up.
Let's actually do 20,
Yeah.
put 2030. They don't have a 2029, but we can do 2030.
And then with you, I'll find out what percentage.
Yeah, I can show you.
So this I don't even need.
You sign the first one?
That's all this.
Yeah. Just the first one, your signature.
Then you got your beneficiary? Yeah. Perfect.
Dennis?
I need to know as fast as I can.
Hi.
I need to be set up as fast as I can.
That's right.
Yeah, right?
That's absolutely
Right?
correct. You and I both.
The
Clock's ticking. Clock's ticking, so.
We will end up setting up all of the accounts whenever we get the paperwork.
Sure.
So we can receive that today, or it can be provided to us at some future date. Either it can be scanned and emailed to us, or faxed to us, or mailed to us in whatever way.
Scan them and email them to you.
Okay, that'd be great.
You're gonna do it?
And then we'll get the account
You
set
want the
up.
paperwork so you can
And then
get
I'll
it
talk to you
set
about
up.
this. There's an online group investment portal that once the plan is set up,
Trust me.
whoever the authorized
benefit
people
you
here
and children.
will have access to that. And then
Not
you,
doing it.
and you'll link that to your payroll bank account.
Oh, yeah,
And
no,
then-
I don't wanna do that.
When you do, when payroll is done, you'll log into that. There will be a roster of whoever
Oh, wow,
is
you're a sweet
participating.
mom.
And then you'll know how much to withhold from their pay because you'll get those forms, the salary
Yeah,
deferral
so if you
forms.
have.
And then you'll just enter those amounts in one time.
$10 going to the plan.
It takes
And they'll
just a
match
few minutes,
$3.
and that money's pulled out of the payroll.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
And, yeah, and then that will, yeah, because we'll track it all through QuickBooks and the payroll system in QuickBooks, but the deduction from our bank account will be a separate deduction,
They don't
which
charge
will
you,
go
just sits
directly
there.
to the investment.
Correct,
Okay,
correct.
perfect.
Okay, so
Any-
you need this back?
Emily,
You need
Benetta.
these
Well,
back?